paintings that we hung around our neck.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Well, let's open a meeting. Welcome, Mary. This is your first
Thank
sit-down
you.
meeting.
It is,
Yeah.
yes.
Do you know everyone?
No, actually, I'm looking around seeing some
Town
new
historian,
faces.
Lee Ferguson.
Hi, nice to meet you, Mary Schneider.
I remember you from when we did the Zoom, when you zoomed in with us.
Yes, yes. And I remember you from our
Right.
cemetery tours.
Yes.
You and you and you. I feel like Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz. And you were there and you were there.
Nice.
Hi, nice to see you all again.
Yeah.
You don't get to leave by clicking your Ruby Hills. together.
I know, right? It's all good. All good.
Thanks for the agenda.
Absolutely.
The first one is the cemetery takeaways. I enjoyed,
Oh, I did too.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
yeah,
Mhm.
learned a lot. I enjoyed meeting Mr. Ellison. You were there for
I
that.
missed
That was a great
So
one
sad.
too.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a zippy little stretch of the road.
Yeah,
there.
Lucas,
Yeah.
is right on 21.
Oh,
And
Mhm.
it's just a very small little shoulder. And we can hear it's not very peaceful, is it? You hear the
No.
cars
I
zoom,
I will
zoom.
tell you that, I go there kind of infrequently. I put on the opposite side because it is just not safe pulling over on
Wow.
the same side.
Yeah.
It's amazing how
Yeah.
fast, especially the cars coming from the south headed towards town.
Mhm.
It's-
Trucks.
You could take your
Truck
life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can imagine when it started the cemetery, it wasn't a super highway.
Probably not, probably
Yeah.
didn't look like that.
So, anyways, any comments?
Anything major, anybody saw like real immediate concerns that we want to address as a group or?
Well, I'm glad Dennis was there.
Yeah.
And the park people
Yes,
to
yeah.
help with the trees because, trees are just there, but.
Mhm.
You know, I visit a lot of cemeteries, Seneca County, Ontario County, et cetera. And I think, we're do a pretty good job with our cemeteries. So many of these cemeteries, there's grass like this, of course, we have some stone repair and stuff. We have to thank the town over the years for, when we were asked to take over the cemeteries, that was my first comment was, well, if we're gonna do it, we're gonna do it regularly, or it's not gonna be just 4 times a year or whatever. And the board allowed that, and they put it in the budget for money for mowing and stuff. So really, our cemeteries are pretty impressive compared to a lot of communities. And Hun Cemetery now is the gem. And I think that's the thing we need to follow when we improve the other cemeteries.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I pay very close attention when I'm out of town. And even the city of Canandaigua, the cemeteries, and there's a lot of very historic, very important graves. And they are not in good shape. They could stand at the higher Peter interview. Peter could do full time just for them, I think. But
Are there more
what you
people?
and Ray have done is
Are there more people like Peter who do that kind of work?
there are a couple other people locally, but more that do sort of lower end maintenance, cleaning and that sort of
Yeah, a lot of people that clean.
conservatories that can actually repair. I've gotten so I can do a little bit of it. I've got supplies up in mine. Matter of fact, one of the headstones, I have to tell you, one of the headstones is sitting at my house right now. I go up my driveway. You can see. Yeah, and that was a
Start a little
rescue-
with
that was a
something.
rescue from the last.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's anything that needs to be rescued this year before winter sets in. But that's a consideration. You've seen it and Ray has seen it, like stone is fine. And then we get into the nasty weather. So I've been kind of the last couple of years.
Changes in a hurry.
Yeah.
Because it can be nice and then it bifurcates because snow melts, gets in between those layers, freezes, cracks, and the face falls off. Some major portion. Got a lot of that.
Is that part of the conservation, the keeping it from sealing it on the top so it
Yes.
doesn't leach? Someone suggested, teams of like high school kids or a history class or something like that might make it their thing or.
And our town supervisor probably a good resource for that. You might not know that, Mary. Our town supervisor is a history teacher at Kennedy Middle School.
I did not know that. Okay.
Really?
Huh.
Who's that? Oh,
Sure.
Mr. Yeah,
Mr. Simpson.
I forgot, he's the good one. Yeah, I was gonna say you must work. with
Wait a
Lisa, yeah.
Check out my son.
Jared. I forgot
Devin is
Jared was
not.
in there.
He should be.
Wait,
Had
what?
one of the signs in our yard.
Yeah. Jared.
Yes, we have lots of history teacher.
Yeah, I think he's in my neighbor too, right?
Sure,
Doesn't
yes,
he live
yes.
on Cooley, right?
Yes, he
Yeah,
is.
okay.
Yep.
So yeah, that would be, I like that idea, getting kids
And so if you
involved.
want to stiff arm the other social studies teacher, that would be great.
Yeah, well, and then there's David York at the high school.
There's
Oh,
some
your
Devin,
son.
who is our varsity lacrosse coach. Teaches middle school.
Wow.
Got it.
And then David is starting with, he's a long-term sub at the high school now.
Oh, all
So
right.
that might be, you know, when kids are new and, I mean, when people are new and they're, it's like, hey, get up a group and.
You'll do
I'm
great the minute they
interested.
find out he's military.
Oh, no, he's not.
Was
He
it
just-
David? Oh, David wasn't
No, that was our other son.
it? Okay.
Yeah.
Sons.
I mean, yeah. David's the grandson.
Awesome.
Okay.
So definitely,
Wow.
Sorry.
Come on, don't do that.
Yeah.
So there's a couple connections for school.
Yeah. I like that
So
idea.
you're talking just the cleaning.
Yeah, cleaning,
Tidying, yeah.
sort of, would Peter be conservation big title and this would be conservation, maintenance?
yeah,
There-
yeah.
There is another fun aspect that I don't know if you guys talked about, so just someone to show up if you did. Probably a lot of the information from the faces of the stones is covered by sod. Now, the blue slate stones are the oldest stones. And blue slate, one stone will fall off in a big chunk, and really nice, you know, you can, then Peter can like put it back on. Another one, just because of the nature of that particular stone, will just fragment. And then, of course, there are the ones that did fall off the big piece and they got hit at the moment. But chances are you would find that there are entire stones and the faces of stones underneath the sod that got that way long before Dennis started maintaining our cemeteries. Because there was, I'd love to hear you describe it sometime, but there was, you know, that period primarily probably the 50s and 60s where those cemeteries received the least attention. And it is in that era that they pulled, I think, that they pulled the footstones. Because it started mechanical mowing instead of having kids go in, you know. The real, everybody remembers the real mowers, so that's what they would have had. And they started mechanical mowing, and mowers wouldn't fit between the head and the footstones.
But they do it.
Threw them in the hedge.
True.
Really?
There
Are
are
they in a
about
lot of
30
hedgerows?
of them that are in
Really?
cemetery.
But they put the
Wow.
headstone back in with the foots.
They left the headstones in place and just, and in some cases, footstones were left when headstones were missing. So an interesting project for the future, and perhaps one of the easiest things to do would be to identify the graves that have a footstone but no headstone. There are not a lot of those, but there are some in every cemetery. And then to step off the approximate location of where the appropriate headstone should be. I say should because probably some of them are there. So we might be talking like 10 or 15% of all the graves may have a footstone in the headstone. Of that, you might find that half or a smaller percentage, actually, there is a headstone there that toppled and was covered slowly with leaves. And, you know, we've all lost stuff in the yard. We know how quickly it disappears beneath the sod. And that's the case with a lot of these. And you can locate them the same way that they find a cover for a septic with a rod. And if you just put a little rubber tip or some tape over the end of your rod as you probe, and then you won't chip the stone or anything, but you'll feel it, you know, you'll feel that solid obstacle underneath. Now that then leads you to having to carefully excavate. But that can be done with a trowel, you know, just carefully remove the sod and see what you've got. But that was one thing that, one of those, you know, things that disturbed me was all the gaps we have. Jump in if you've got, because you spent a lot of time there, you know.
Well,
improved it.
you know, when we took over, I think prior to us doing anything, I think the highway, I'm not sure, I think that, you know, someone else was taking care of them, then we were asked to take over. Pretty much when we took over, you know, things are still the same.
Yeah.
Things
Well, I
haven't
would
changed.
think,
We
yeah.
didn't remove anything or change anything.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it was that much earlier, you know, the beginning of the mechanical mowing.
What was the purpose of the footstone?
So all of our early cemeteries, the graves are oriented so that on the final day of judgment, when the dead rise up, they will face the rising sun in the west.
Oh, like that? Really?
Because on the final day of judgment, the
Mhm.
sun will rise in the west, according to earlier Christian beliefs of the 18th and 19th century.
Never
Okay.
heard it.
So they oriented their cemeteries that way. Catholic cemeteries probably not. This seems to be probably like a congregational, United Methodist Presbyterian kind of thing from the late 18th, early 19th century. A footstone really just sort of says, here's the person, you know, it's between these two stones, right? It's between these two stones.
They weren't marked with anything, they were just.
Depends. Some are blank. Often it bears the initials. Zadok Hun's footstone is curiously way the heck away from his headstone.
Tall guy.
Real tall, about 25 yards tall. When I say way far away, it's over in a corner. And it would be the southwest corner of the cemetery, is where his headstone or his footstone is. And you've also all seen his headstone at Hun Cemetery, gorgeous stone. Right? And it also doesn't match. But it says, his footstone says Rev ZD Hun, I think, or Z Hun.
Oh,
And it's in its footstone sign. So I don't know what that deal is with that. So when those stones got damaged, you know, those headstones got damaged, a lot of times if the footstone is still there, they just left it. So that also, if you're walking through, you're like, this is not a road, this doesn't make sense. And we got here, and then we got like a jog, and there's little stones. They're really kind of, it's quaint, it really is, I like it, I like the look of it, I like that kind of randomness. I think it's very interesting, but the reason there are so many gaps in Hun, Remington, not really, and Lucas is mostly because of the damage to those stones that create big gaps. And if you also go back, and you would probably all really find this fascinating. Generally in the early spring, when the grass is new and it's short, you will see grave depressions all over the place. Harder to spot this time of year, but early in the year, very easy to spot. And there are a lot of them at Hun and Remington. And like an inordinate number of them at Remington, they have no stone whatsoever, which is a big puzzle to me, whether there was a disinterment and families were moved to another location, which is a possibility, they did do such things, or whether they were graves that were, like,
Paupers' graves or something.
or unlikely, but that she settled. So the Potter's Field is out in Hopewell. And our area is prosperous now, it's even more prosperous then. So there weren't a lot of folks that died without, and if they did, they might have gotten just a single farm. That's the other thing that we don't know. We think we have our hands on all the cemeteries. We have all the known historic cemeteries. But as everybody knows, family plots are very common.
Yeah.
So we should really keep our ears open for just to know about them and how they relate to our city.
Exactly.
So, it's just a thought that since I was on the tour, I wanted to share with you guys that, there probably is hope for stones. And there is more rationale than it appears at first glance.
I got a question. Do we or do we not? I'm thinking about the Boston Road Cemetery. Do we or do we not maintain it?
Oh, you mean John's Cemetery, Wolverton?
Or is it?
We do. We have the right to go in, and John has been really good about that. And as you know, because you told me Jay Dutcher did everybody know Jay Dutcher? Jay's lives over on.
What Whitehouse Road?
I always forget. He's been active in the community. He's a veteran, serving the Navy with me. His son did some work there, I think, as a scout, and then Jay also brought in the CVs to do some work. This cemetery is entirely on private property.
Oh, yes, I
And it
remember
is
discussion
significant.
about this one, yeah,
It is a
okay.
significant early cemetery. What the future of that cemetery is, I mean, I would hope that John will make provision someday, Ray, for it to become public, when something happens to him, that he'd like will it to the town or something.
Why is
Oh,
that?
thanks.
Why is this now not?
Considered
He hasn't decided to give it to us. But that doesn't mean,
How can that be?
That's,
How can that be?
A cemetery needs to be considered abandoned before it becomes the job of the town to maintain it.
Yeah,
That cemetery is at this point not abandoned. It's owned by someone who maintains it. So until he says, I don't want to maintain it anymore, it would be the
that's the
town.
first time I heard of that. Penny.
well, and I think it's I think it's a good starting point for the committee might at some near future time, want to talk to John, just say, let's have a chat. Let's have an intelligent conversation about it and what your thoughts are. Where does that go in the future?
That's
Of 10, 15, 20 years.
We did it as a
We have
Me-
plenty to
me have
think
the
about
chat?
in the
I could.
meantime.
But I'm not gonna bug him right now because he's running for office. And that could get really muddy.
Yeah, we have plenty to focus on with the town cemetery.
But I think you're right, that it's a thing to think about.
I think he cares enough about the cemetery, and he was there when when it was being taken care of, and I think he cares enough about it that he's gonna make sure it stays like it is, and that gets back to the old.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, and he was very involved in the ordinance committee when I was approaching the ordinance committee about establishing this committee.
Mhm.
He wanted to know where his responsibilities and rights lay. And wanted to understand that it was delineated, but strictly between his cemetery and the cemeteries that this committee has. So he understands where things are at. And I don't think it's, well, I don't want to speak for him. I don't think I think he'd probably be open to hearing our thoughts.
Just to make sure you're talking about Mr. Casey, right? Not Mr.
Yeah, John Casey.
Yeah,
Yep.
right. And that's the one that goes all the way down to Westlake Road, that's where his.
Yes.
Yeah, his front is on Westlake and
And
on,
this is a really
actually,
cool
the
one, too,
Dutcher's
Mary.
property is on Whitehall's Road and
Really
backs
is.
up to the cemetery.
I-
That's where their connection.
Does
is.
it back up to the cemetery or to his land?
To his land, very close to
Yeah.
where those.
The old
are.
road.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the old
Yeah.
road. Yeah.
And we do have a War of 1812 veteran that's interred there.
Mhm.
I think he's the only veteran, isn't he, Ray, that you recall? And then I recall. Um,
Well, anybody else have any other takeaways? Stuart, I'm glad it wasn't 93 degrees.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah,
Right,
we've had
right.
good weather, yeah.
The only reason I brought that up is that I was approached by Jay. And he's wondering about it.
Oh.
Wants to know where it stands.
Okay, you can tell him it's a question mark. But the John Carrison is aware.
So there is an abandoned road, you said?
Yes,
Where does the road go to?
goes from Whitehall's Road to Westlake Road.
Yeah, I just don't know where White was.
Well, it parallels on one side of this creek. It parallels Whitehall's Road.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Kind of
I
connects
must-
Laurel Lane.
Oh, it's
It's
Up for the
it's-
water tower.
Yeah, it's really just a
yeah,
dirt kind of path.
That you
stone.
can't
that
establish
is-
that.
it's the other side of the creek.
We have a number of abandoned roads. that,
Yeah.
Changing things up, in the automobile. around.
Yeah. Okay, well. Schedule landscape cleanup. What are we doing with
Yeah,
that?
so we had talked when we were meeting about doing a cleanup volunteer, kind of more focus on landscape. We talked today about getting some kids involved in some cemetery cleanup too. I'm not sure if we want to do those two together, what that looks like. You know, I think it'd be, if we want to schedule something in the next few weeks, like before Labor Day, say. I think it'd be tough to get kids involved because they're not in school yet, you know? So maybe we could do something focused more on landscape cleanup and then move into something in the fall with the kids where we do actually some headstone cleanup. In addition, we could always do landscape cleanup in addition. Really just looking for direction on what you guys want to
Are
do.
you picking like one specific cemetery?
I think it'd be good to pick one, just so
Yeah.
that we're not trying to
Yeah.
carpool, especially with other
Or
people's
still one
children.
little here and one little
Yes,
there and not
exactly,
getting
yeah.
anything really accomplished?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know one of the big things for us was always raking the leaves, cleaning up the leaves. Spent a lot of time doing that and so on and so forth, so. That would be something, of course, that wouldn't be until October or something.
Yep.
And I guess what exactly are you looking for with landscape now? You have the soil with,
Right, so I recall at Sand Hill, there was a few things identified by the tree team and the parks crew to be cleaning up. I know poison ivy was one of those. I'm not sure we want to get into that too much.
it's a better fall.
But there was a
Yeah.
lilac, a heritage lilac that needed some trimming back and quite a few trees in that area that could be trimmed. I think in my mind, Sand Hill definitely stands out as the one that needs the most attention landscaping wise at this point. I think the other ones have some other items like trees coming down, but I don't think we're gonna go out and take a tree down. Unless
whole-
anybody
that-
wants
The whole
to.
hedgerow down in Sand Hill needs some cleaning. It has a lot of invasive species. I thought when I talked to Andy, I thought he said something about the park crew has been doing some
Yeah.
work down there. I don't know.
Yeah, the boys were gonna go down to Hun too. And I've done a little bit of clearing of buckthorn. The whole south hedgerow on Hun, which is the one that borders Miller's Park, is buckthorn. There's a few decent trees in there, but when I say few. That hedge is solid buckthorn. And that needs to come out. One, because it's invasive. Two, because we can't get at all the footstones that are thrown in there until we could, but we're probably gonna find more, and it will be easier if we remove the buckthorn first. And then Sam and Andy were looking at an autumn to remove some of that, but we can, if we wanted to, we could go ahead and remove this. They'll come and put the brush on the truck.
Oh, they will?
Yeah.
Oh, they'll take it away?
Yep, so if we feel we want to do that, Lindsay will support that with the guys. They definitely have no shortage of.
So would we work with them or they just come and pick up after? if
I think the
it's-
easiest thing off the top of my head, Karen, would be for, if we do it on a weekend, that's probably best for all of us. And if Dennis was the crew chief,
Mm.
we could probably accomplish a lot and we could take it to the corner. You know, the guys wouldn't have to come in on a weekend, which I'm actually, anyhow, as far as their hours. When I pulled it, I cut like, I think 3 or 4 buck fronts. I dragged them to the corner. I didn't want to overdo it because I wasn't, I can coordinate
How
with them
big are
yet.
the-
Oh, some of those buckthorns are like this. So, you know, chainsaw, and then they need to be, you know, broken down into sections that are easy enough for them to handle and put through the chipper. All that kind
And I'm sure the tree committee would like to be involved in that too. I mean, they've identified a lot of them.
of- That would be awesome. And
You did buy a chipper.
the other thing that's really great about that hedgerow and the Hun Cemetery, you guys all noted the gigantic oaks at Hun. That the tree committee is intensely interested in because those trees are, a couple of those trees are probably verging up on 200 years. And could even be a little bit beyond that. But there's one that's on, I think our property line runs kind of through the tree. Majority of the tree is on Danny Root's property. I think it's still Danny Root that lives there. Isn't it?
I think so, I think he still does.
So we kind of need to talk to Mr. Root, which, yes, Remington Root, and he lives next door to Hunt.
Yeah.
And he is descended, I think Denny is descended of the Roots
Oh, okay.
from Canandaigua.
We're still working on criteria for a heritage tree. Our first goal is to identify them in the parks and cemeteries, but our ultimate goal is to identify heritage trees in the town of Canandaigua.
Which I think is,
Heritage means age, basically.
Heritage could include a lot of things,
So
you know,
age is-
size, age, some
Or it's a
historical
chestnut.
thing, maybe someone famous sat by a tree or something.
Yeah.
fortunate Elmer Chestnut, right? That
Yeah.
would probably also, just by variety.
Yeah.
So we're still working on that. Right now, we're all visiting, so.
Well, I think, you know, you guys decided where you want to go. The Hun, I know, and I, you know, all my travels and time spent in our cemetery. The Sand Hill's got issues, and in Sand Hill is actually, there has been damage from some of those big locusts, just, you know, limbs breaking off and stuff. Just,
There's a lot of things. And, you know, I think if you want the kids involved, obviously, we're gonna have to wait till school starts, and it would have to be on a weekend. And I think it would be nice, you know, maybe to contact someone at the school to see if they can organize some. And again, I don't know if we brought it up before, I guess I brought it up with the tree committee, we were talking about volunteers and stuff. You don't want a lot either.
Right.
You know, we always, when we had Love My Park Day, we found that 12 or something was really great. You start to get more, they run into each other and you can't find enough jobs for them.
Exactly.
You know, you don't need a lot of
you need like 3 kids, 3 dedicated, 3 or 4
3, 5
dedicated
kids, you know,
kids.
3 or 5 kids with the adults and you can accomplish a lot. But once you start getting a large group,
Yeah.
then you really don't accomplish a lot.
So maybe on our cleanup, we could just sort of get ideas of what needs to be done in cleanup too, but you know, it could be sort of a fact finding.
Absolutely, yeah, kind of like an initial, we build a
Mhm.
foundation, assess,
Mhm.
kind of come up with some different jobs and
Mhm.
work on what we can that day and then schedule. So we're good with maybe scheduling something this summer and then following up with something in the fall.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
And I know there's at least 3 of us that have and are reasonably decent with the chainsaw. We obviously don't need 3 guys with chainsaws all at once. I would the chainsaw and Dennis is capable hands. And if David wanted to do the breaking down of the larger ones, I'd be, you know, happy to drag. But
Now, what would we do with the brush if we?
Drag it to the, I would drag it to the corner. So what I did, David, is I started cutting most of it over near the southwest corner. I was gonna kind of work west to east.
Mhm.
And so I didn't have very far to drive, but I was just taking them right to the corner by the slip rail fence there
Mhm.
on Woolhouse. And that way the guys could back up and just.
Who would do it at the parks? People would
Yeah, the
come
park-
with a
the park.
chipper
Andy and Sam will.
Yeah,
and chip it
they're
up.
great.
I'll coordinate with them too. If there is a possibility, I'm sure Sam would like to attend as well. So I'll
Yeah.
coordinate with Lindsay.
They're great guys.
Yeah, I think
Really
with
great
Andy and
guys.
Sam, I think, and with us, I think that would be great. I think.
They're him. You know, they're the 30-year-old you, right?
They're two great guys, I'll tell you.
They are.
The Parks are in good hands with those guys.
So are the boundaries clear on those Sand Hill and Hun?
They're both pretty well defined, yeah. At Hun, I would say the only questionable is the root property. What is that to the north? Is that
Mhm.
kind of?
Yeah, it would be sort of the northeast corner.
But the back field is fairly well marked with a fence and then it's on the corner. With Sand Hill, as we know, we've got that overgrown fencing all around it, so I think if we were to stay within the fencing, we'd be fine. As far as that goes, I think there might be a little bit more to do at Sand Hill with many hands versus maybe a smaller crew at
Smaller
home
group.
that focuses on,
And Sand Hill is near the school.
yeah, and it's in the school.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Did I go to Sand Hill? I know I missed that.
Yes.
Yes,
Second
we
day,
did
which
that in
one?
the north one.
Is
It's
that-
on Emerson Road. At the corner of Sand Hill and Emerson Road, it's got a kind of a hill that goes up.
So is that the one that had the lilac?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
It's
Okay.
a Little steepish kind of.
Yes,
The Andrews family.
And it
is
had
in
a-
that corner.
I
Some
remember
flowers
that.
there.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
was the cemetery for what would have been the Paddleford Hamlet. Or
Okay.
Canada.
Mhm.
Most of our cemeteries are associated with one or another of the hamlets. The only in Centerfield had to drag their dead farther. I guess it was a little bit farther going the wagon,
Right.
because they didn't have a cemetery in the center.
Yeah.
Well, there may be some.
Maybe there's some of those family plots again.
Right, that we know.
Yeah, some would have gone over by you,
Yeah.
over to Cooley,
Yeah.
and probably some over to Hunt.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
makes sense.
but Paddleford was, probably everybody in the neighborhood was buried there, and then Greg,
I wouldn't say,
okay.
Mhm.
There are some great Civil War era stones.
yeah.
Mm.
I think you still can be buried on the property too.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some provisions for.
Well, that would be an interesting thing to
Yeah.
for this committee to put out sometime.
What the.
No program.
For people, to find out if people could
Oh,
have
yeah.
graves that they have not, or they've been
Questionnaire, do
mummified.
you have bodies on your?
Now's the time to speak up.
Yeah.
Just curious. Yeah, okay, so
So,
you want to schedule,
Yeah,
so what are you saying? Does it one, or both of these two, maybe prioritize these two? And decide what we're gonna do at the cemetery and then come back and do a cleanup thing?
I
We
think,
need.
I
I
think we
think
could
we
do
could,
it,
along
yeah.
with Andy and
Yeah.
Sam, do Hun. And then in the fall, get the high school kids and some of the high
Work on
school kids
Sand Hill.
involved and go down to Sand Hill.
that
And the
sounds
tree
like a good
committee.
plan. Yeah.
I don't have my calendar, so I don't know.
I
Right.
can't remember my contacts with Boy Scouts, but there's gotta be some older near Eagle that need to do community service. And I can check in, not a troop, but a couple.
Yeah.
And the DAR too, they do cleanup days, don't they? I believe so.
So our DAR has been really helpful and active along with the SAR.
Yeah.
Ray's worked with them at various times. The only problem with the SAR, Mary, or the DAR is they're older than the people at this table, okay? DAR and SAR are struggling for members. There are a few younger people here and there that are joining.
Yeah.
I think they probably tend to be just like us. How do we get younger people involved? They're more looking for a resource than able to go, hey, yeah, we'll bring them.
Okay,
Ken Strong backs over there.
yeah. I'm just about to submit my application actually for DAR, so,
See, and that will be,
There you
will be
go,
one
that's
of those
perfect.
younger people that's joining.
Yeah.
well, if 55 is considered younger,
know,
I
it
guess,
is.
but
It
yeah,
is.
okay,
It is.
okay.
It is.
That's a
Yeah, but
kid.
the DAR was.
Hey,
heavily
kid,
involved
aw,
with-
thank you.
involved with Pierce Park.
Mary, I'm pushing, I'll be 60 next year, and like, he'll
Yeah.
call me kid, they'll call me kid, okay?
All right,
This tells you where we're at.
Okay. yeah.
Do we wanna pick maybe two and then we'll just confirm? Do you wanna, because you said you don't have.
Either
your
that or
calendar.
email them out to us, we could pick or something, or.
Okay.
Are we looking for like a week, because Andy and Sam, I don't know if they can work on a Saturday or not, I'm sure they can juggle their schedule.
I think it depends, and as long as we give them enough notice.
Right,
We
they
may
can
be
juggle
able to
their,
flex, want to get one of them
Well,
to be available.
and the other
that
thing we can
day.
do is we can hold our work. And if we do drag it and make a brush pile, we can make a brush pile on Saturday, they
Right.
can,
and they
they
can
can do
clean it
their
up,
thing on Wednesday.
that's
Yeah,
true,
exactly.
that's true.
I would
Okay.
hope Doug Stone could attend as well. I think he'll be another, great
Mhm.
muscle.
Oh, God, him
person
and
to
Dennis
help
together will end
with-
up
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I think we'll have plenty
the
of
finest
strength
tree
for
program
sure.
around.
So,
Mhm.
right, right.
And I will invite the tree committee to it.
That's
I would love
I'm
awesome.
sure there will be at
One
least a
more
couple.
question about Sand Hill.
That's
Have
it.
we got clearance for going in and doing that kind of work? Because that is.
That boundary, you mean?
Privately owned.
No, the town owns Sand Hill Cemetery.
Oh,
Yes,
they do.
yes.
The town owns
100%.
what?
Since
Sand
when?
Hill.
As far as I can remember. The town owns Sand Hill Cemetery.
There's still burials
Correct, yes,
in there.
correct.
It's like academy that they have to go through, that this town manages it.
Okay,
Should we talk about mowing?
That's next
Okay.
on 23 budget.
So you're gonna give us some dates for cleanup, is that what?
Well, the Saturdays sound good for everyone. We've
I like
mentioned
Saturday.
Saturdays.
Yeah,
Just depends which one.
Depends.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
like this Saturday is the 13th, then we've got the 20th, the 27th, and the 3rd of September. Those would be our options before Labor Day.
Which one feels like a cool
The third- the
Saturday?
third-
Yeah.
The third.
The third is
That's
Labor Day
September
weekend.
3rd.
No, isn't that Labor Day weekend?
It is
Yeah.
Labor
Yeah,
Day
so I-
weekend, yeah, no.
Okay. So not
But
that
I
one.
can, I have to look at my calendar.
Okay,
And the 10th, 17th.
okay.
Yeah, we also go to the town. I love September.
Well,
Oh, that's
Sure,
what
September
my
favorite
other
month.
stinks, I've got commitments.
You wanna look at the following
The 10th
Saturday?
is after
The
10th.
Oh, that is good.
I'm gonna be out of state.
Um,
Well, no, I'm here the 10th. I'm sorry. I leave the 12th to the 19th. Yeah. I
And
could
Get
do
all
that.
September-
your blisters
September-
in
September.
order. Get blistered up and go.
I know.
Okay,
Could we-
September 10th
Yeah, can we
tentatively.
put that as a
Yeah,
tentative?
yeah.
I have a hair appointment, but I'll move it.
Until after we clean
I know,
up. so we can have nice
exactly,
hair.
exactly.
We're talking about Han.
Yep, so September 10th tentatively, we'll meet at Hun to work through some of the buckthorn, clearing that,
Mhm.
picking up sticks, clearing away and moving, I think also some footstones as we can
Yep.
out of that
Yep.
area into a more secure location where we can start to work on connecting those up. So
Yeah.
that sounds everyone,
Early
sounds good for
sounds good.
everyone, yeah.
9
I like
o'clock-
more
9
than
o'clock
two.
or
Is
something.
9 too
9?
early?
Yeah.
No.
Not too early, but it gets hot,
It
but
does, yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
September
Oh,
10th
maybe
shouldn't be-
September.
I think
Yeah.
we get the.
I'm hopeful.
Let's hope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
okay.
Probably gonna
9 a.m.
rain.
9 a.m. in the
Right.
town,
Yeah,
and the town is furnishing lunch, right?
You got it. Yeah, we've got a big budget this year. I'm happy to do
It
that.
can come out of the
yeah.
historian's budget.
It
if you
can come
want.
out of the
Okay.
cemetery committee
Yeah,
budget.
we're looking
Yeah,
to
we've got
spend-
No, seriously, I
money.
have I do have a
Yeah.
budget
Yeah,
and I don't like go spending willy-nilly on stuff, so.
definitely. So just in terms of focusing on making sure we have the materials that we need as, and items, do you need from the town any like hedge trimmers? I mean, I can bring some clippers and that kind
We've
of
got
thing.
some-
You guys
Yeah,
wanna bring
clippers
that?
and stuff
We'll
like
really
that.
focus on the landscape,
Yeah,
not
the
so much
chainsaw,
the
right?
cleanup of the
Yep.
headstone.
I
so we
think
don't
we'll
need
probably be
brushes
able to-
or
I think
Cleaners
we'll be able to
Okay.
do things.
to get
We're
that,
gonna
okay.
Be
Need some good
concentrated on
loppers.
the hedgerow.
Correct.
We will, chainsaw and loppers will be our best friends.
Yeah, bring some, yeah, exactly. All right,
I
great.
got a chainsaw.
Wear your gloves.
Yes,
Yeah.
gloves for sure.
Do you want any wheelbarrows?
Yeah, maybe to drag some
Probably
of
not
that
a bad
stuff.
idea.
Yeah.
Probably not a bad idea,
The
especially when
stones.
it's moving the footstones.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Loppers,
Better to have and not need, right?
Exactly.
shovel. They're probably a little in the,
Oh,
sort of semi-buried in that gully, right? That's the footstones.
Well, I pulled a dozen of them, they're sitting on the edge of the grass right now.
Oh, okay.
There's another 20 or so that are in various stages of being covered. Trowels,
Hmm.
room gardening trowel.
That's great. And then that
Very
from
good
there
job.
we'll
Yeah.
connect with our
And a small
teachers, school
spade.
connections and
yeah.
see if we can
Do
get
something a
another-
little later
Yep.
at the,
Yeah, that sounds great. In October
Sand Hill.
timeframe, we could do leaf cleanup. That puts more people to work as well.
Mhm.
So we could even coordinate multiple locations if we wanted to have each of us kind of at a location, direct some groups. We'll see.
Yeah,
See,
that
sounds
gives us
great.
a start. Great. All right.
I have a question. What was it, Sand Hill that we approved a tree being cut down
Yes.
up to
funds,
2,000
yeah,
now?
Up to 2,000 for the parks.
No, who
committee.
does that? Who
The
goes-
parks team
the
that
parks people?
Dennis was spoke, yeah, Sam and Andy will. But if they needed to rent any equipment to do that, we wanted to make sure they had that available to them.
Okay.
Yeah,
Hey,
and the town
hey,
has
this is-
purchased a bucket truck.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
So
so
that's-
this is just real nitty gritty. So just, when Andy and Sam need the bucket truck, it's gonna sound fun, but do they have to rent it from Jim?
No, we share services like for that.
They don't do, they don't have to do
Correct.
the swap, the budget thing.
Correct, yeah.
So we have a really great bucket truck. It's been years,
And a wood
we had
chipper.
used to borrow from
And
the
a
city.
chipper.
Yeah, and a wood chipper.
We should keep those chips for mulch.
That's not a
I'm-
great idea.
yes.
That's a great idea.
We could, yeah,
Just pile
I'm
them
very
back
excited
down.
about that
Right
bucket
there,
truck.
yeah.
I'm like a kid with tacos, right? I think it's the greatest thing in the world.
I think it just got registered. It took a little bit of time to get that transaction finalized as far as the title. and whatnot.
It is gonna make such a
I do believe
difference
it's
in our
registered
parks
now
and cemeteries. and-
Put in service.
yeah, with all the removal of trees that we
Yeah.
need.
Yeah.
It's on the list, I'm sure.
I'll get an update too.
So you took care of the budget?
I
you?
did. I went to our budget meeting for 2023. I brought our proposed budget with me. We put in $13,250 for 2023 as our request. Now, this is just our department request, and then the budget officer puts together the budget, and the town board goes through a public hearing process. They are allowed to make any changes and then vote on it. So Karen put in a good word with the town board to keep our budget where it's at.
That was last year's budget?
Last year's budget was a little higher, that was 20,000, but when I broke it down, it breaks down to what we do need to set aside is $1,000 for any costs, like you said. We do have a few cemeteries with active burials, so if we needed to do anything for that, we set aside $1,000 for that. And 5,000 for Pine Bank Cemetery, that's based on our contract to keep
Yeah.
them working and solvent.
5,000.
Yep. And then, so we put in 5,000 for Ellison, for Peter to do headstone conservation. I think that's very generous based on the
Mhm.
pricing he's given us. We put in 1,250 for a split rail fence, either at Cooley or New Michigan to start, because those were really small and just needed that front. And in the discussion, we felt that if we wanted to do like Remington Rue or a different cemetery that was bigger, that would be where we would focus a volunteer or an Eagle Scout project on those larger areas. With the fence, we anticipate that it would be purchased materials by the town and then volunteers would install it. So that might be us coordinating that next year, that goes through. And then we have $1,000 for education and public engagement. So that could be flyers, it could be programming, it could be cleaning materials, quite a bit. I felt that was a good price for that as well. So that makes $13,250 in our request for 2023. Does that sound good
Sounds
with
good.
everybody?
Yeah.
Cover everything? And then one of the things we also discussed was mowing, and we've alluded to it earlier. Donna and Richard West, who attended, they're on the history team, they attended one of our
Mhm.
tours together. They're working at Academy on marking each of those headstones. And when they went to Academy in July 28th, they found a lot of damage. Unfortunately, I have some
This is
images
new
here.
damage?
Yeah, that can be passed around. The contracted mower that we hired for the cemeteries this year had an issue with staffing, hired new people, and it was really bad. As you see, I'll pass the images around. Over a dozen stones were displaced, moved, bumped, broken. This also, we've noted at Hun, there were quite a few as well. I think a lot of places.
Yeah. They were, the first crew that I actually met by accident. I was stopping at Hun to get some information off the stone. There were two guys there. One of them, not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but a really good guy. And they seemed to know what they were doing and be doing a good job. And so I don't know what happened with the owner with regards to those two guys. I suspect that the damage at Academy was not those two guys. Those two fellas assured me that they knew what they were doing. I spoke with them at length. And even said, you know what, if you feel like it's easier to let a little bit of grass go around the base of the stone, I personally would prefer that to you getting too close to a historic house. And I spoke with them about, the weed whacker, because the weed whacker will do damage to those blue slate stones when they start to bifurcate. Yeah, just wraps it in. So, and they tried over the fragments.
It's breaking my heart saying.
I know, and then what happened, and I think that was different guys. And you can go ahead and tell the rest of it, but they are history.
It was really unfortunate that we had to have this, but so grateful that Donna and Richard were there, are visiting our cemeteries, are active, and we're able to identify it right away. We brought it to the contractor's attention. Our point of contact is the Parks Department. So Lindsay as the Parks Coordinator, and then Andy manages kind of communication with the contractors. He let him know right away. In addition, Andy and Sam, they actually drove to Academy that day and they put stones back. Anything that could be put back on its base or put back in place, straightened out, they took care of that. They really went above and beyond that day to make sure to try to resolve.
You should do that.
The contractor did reach out and requested that we let him know if there was any cost for damages. At this point, we really can't even say so much the cost, because there are broken stones that Peter hasn't looked at yet, that we could be working on for years to come. As you know, these things go from in a great condition to not so great condition very, very, very quickly. So but it did bring up the conversation again of mowing. And as Leif alluded to, with mowing and having a contractor, you get what the contractor is offering. And this is not a new issue at all. This is not at all a new issue. We've been discussing it year after year. And with this contractor, we actually made an effort this year to put a separate bid out for cemeteries, in which we really clearly stated our expectations for care.
Which made this that much more egregious.
Exactly. And this is someone who came with great references. The owner is fantastic. I can't say anything negative about him. Unfortunately, his crew is where this resulted in. So,
And I think this is what's going on in general through our economy.
Just
can't hire
thinking that.
So
Yeah.
It's so difficult. I mean, originally, look at the problems they had with the contractor that was doing the parks. They were looking terrible.
Yeah.
And I know the town doesn't want to go back to good old Gordy. That was one of my staff. I mean, he literally did all the cemeteries and he had his heart and soul in
With so much care.
the
and
cemetery.
attention.
So, you know, he was conscientious as to what was going on. And you just you can't find it anymore unless you want to go back to hiring one person, the Parks and Recreation, whose responsibility is the cemetery, and they start to develop that love for the cemetery, let me tell you, because when you're around there, then you're conscientious of taking care of it. You get an outsider in there, they're just there to mow them and get their paycheck on Friday.
I had this exact conversation with Kate, and I 100% agree with you, Dennis. And I think, and this is just my opinion, guys, and I'm ex officio, so you all have to decide, but my advice to you as town historian and, you know, having gotten into this whole cemetery business is that you all debate and discuss the merits of having the town pass a resolution for the Parks Department to hire a seasonal employee who would be responsible for mowing the cemeteries. The town, I honestly think when the numbers are crunched, the town, it's not going to cost the town that much more. May even come with some savings because depending on the person and the weather on any given year, they would probably be able to task that person to do some other things in addition to the cemeteries. But I think we've reached the point now where we've proven through experience that, just as Dennis said, just as Kate had said, you don't know what you're getting. It's a gamble, it's a crapshoot. And we had issues last year, which as I was working on with Kate to produce a resolution to go before the ordinance committee to create this committee, there was damage to our heads, one of the headstones in Hun Cemetery last year, which we still haven't been able to get repaired. We will, but that happened last year. This year is many times worse. So I think this committee, it was formed at exactly the right time, but it is up to you guys, and I don't want to presume to tell you what you should do.
We should have the equipment. I mean, I don't know if we had purchased 3 lawnmowers or anything. I don't know if the town still has those.
We
that
have
got-
not
So we should have
surplus our
equipment. It basically means one person hiring one person whose responsibility on the parks
Yeah,
is a park laborer to take care of the cemetery. There's plenty to do besides, you know, with the trimming and just cleaning up. And
there
I think we
absolutely
could get
is.
a retired, I would be surprised if we wouldn't have several people that would apply, you know, retirees who want to do that, just like we have guys mowing our roadsides.
I spoke
you know,
with the
every
Parks Department and they actually did have more people apply this year to be seasonal mowers than seasonal laborers. When they put out that position, they need kind of people to do everything. And the majority of people who applied wanted to be put on a mower and left to mow. That was what they wanted. So there definitely is no shortage of applicants. I know you and I have discussed, there are people from the county that are retired that do that. And in my conversation with the Parks Department, they are in agreement. They would like to move that way as well. So it leaves us with the conversation of, do we want to make a recommendation to the town board that when they look at the budget for 2023, they allocate the funds that would have been spent on the contract to personnel.
Who took those pictures? Mr. West?
Donna and Richard, yes, Donna and Richard. took those photos.
And they're great. What they watch, they observe everything, but you know, the point is, you're right, these are living museums, and if we don't. Outdoor museums, what are we protecting?
Right, and once we factor in the damage to the headstones on top of the contract for the mowing, we're losing money hand over fist.
Yeah, right. And like you said, with the weather, like, our contracts are scheduled so that they get paid by the week. And they have to have, you know, a certain quality of grass. It has to be under 3 inches and whatnot. So if this particular summer it's dry, the grass isn't growing, but that contractor still has to pay his employees. So they're coming out and mowing, even though we might not really need that care because they need to get that paycheck. If we had an employee, we could allocate that attention to something else.
Hey, Bob, you're gonna go mow something else, or you're gonna go plant
Right,
trees
or
with
help with a
Andy.
project at the Parks Committee, water
Or
flowers.
not work, I mean,
Or not work,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yep.
exactly.
if that's.
Sounds
they're-
good.
So how do you make that proposal? Now,
Yeah,
what's the
so-
next step for?
Yeah, so what we would do is put together a memo. It could be as long or as short as we'd like it to be. And simply making a recommendation to the town board that we would attach to their agenda as far as just making sure that communication, when they're looking at the budget and they're noticing that line item, that we're asking them to support it staying in there. So
Will
we could-
Lindsay help provide the information that we would need to go into that memo regarding hours and so forth?
I-
Since that person would be in her department.
they're working on it,
Okay.
on one themselves, actually.
Okay, They're doing
So
all
I
that,
think we
okay,
would
research.
be best at focusing it from our perspective.
okay.
What are our priorities?
So we would
and
be
how
supporting-
would-
More or less, we'd be supporting her request.
Correct, exactly, yeah,
Perfect.
yeah, and from our standpoint, so, if we wanna maybe identify a few items that make it beneficial, maybe sell that a little bit, I'd be happy to write that up in a memo for the board.
We just need an in-house person that's responsible. for it.
Yes,
I think if you have an in-house person that's always there, their heart and soul's there for the cemeteries. It's not just to come in for a job or something.
Well, for other reasons, I mean, the fact that they're there mowing, they're gonna know if somebody else has been doing something. And if there's, thank God, headstone tipping isn't a thing anymore, but if that was to happen, they'd know if there was damage from trees, they'd be able to report to this committee and to Lindsay immediately that, hey, there's an issue with that place, where we don't really, the contracting works could give them.
And I'd be happy to push this at a town meeting when, the request for that position, but ahead of time, I mean, the dollar per dollar, that's kind of where town board comes to with money, Where's the cost savings or certainly saving some.
What are they paying out of contract with cemeteries?
It changes each year based on what the contracts are. I don't have the exact total for the cemetery contract this year. We generally pay somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000 a summer for the parks
Wow.
and
Wow.
the cemeteries. All the parks, Peanut Line
Oh,
and the
parks.
cemeteries.
Oh.
Yeah, everything together. We broke it apart this year, so I don't have that specific breakdown of the two. But we generally will do it all in one big one, and it's between usually 60 and 70,000. And it's based on the low bid, because we're a municipal agency, we can't just award a contract to a vendor because we like them. We have to go get multiple bids, and we have to award it based on the way it's written. which
And
would
there's
be,
another trip
the low
hazard
bid.
with, letting out contracts. You can't go with who's the best, you can't go with,
Yeah.
with
So
some of
this
experience.
is, cemetery mowing is tied into the whole package.
Correct.
Yeah,
But you can. still
that's
break
part
it
of the
up.
problem. Probably.
Yeah,
Because you gotta be big enough to
yep,
do
Well,
some
the other-
vast
the best
spaces
you
and
can
make
make
some
up.
time and.
yep, and it is.
Looking around.
In defense, which is hard for me to defend any of this, but it is the most complex mowing of any public mowing.
they probably hate doing it.
I mean,
If
realistically,
you throw
save
some
it to
kid
last.
in there, and frankly, I would be really surprised if this kid wasn't still. Okay, because the damage at Academy, it wasn't like, gee, I'm just clumsy. It was more like he was staggering down the tunnels, okay?
I mean,
And if you throw some,
realistically,
experience on a zero turn.
we would save money by hiring someone in-house to do that,
Yeah, exactly.
Without having to do
Just
the
a real
repairs.
quick calculation here. So
You know?
what would we say, maybe April to October?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
late April through mid-October, late October.
Okay, so we'll say 26 weeks. Say we did do a full-time person, so 40 hours at, what would be reasonable? What would we say, like $18 an hour?
Mhm.
$18 an hour times 26 weeks is $18,720.
And they're probably paying that now, right, for a contractor.
I'm
at least
sure our
that-
contract's over 20,000.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I think we could hire someone
And that
at
person
40
could be
hours a
working
week
someplace
for
else.
under what we're
And
paying.
then take that 20 and add to it, the repairs that we have to pay Peter
Right,
when
There you
they.
go.
yeah, so,
No, but it's
so there's a good
responsibility.
argument too.
You wouldn't do actual mowing, or would,
No,
Peter,
no, the guy you're talking about hiring.
He's doing the mowing
this,
and.
we would hire a seasonal person to mow, yeah,
Sorry.
Okay. all right.
yeah, to mow. So it would be mowing, they would report to the Parks Department and,
Okay.
yeah.
And
Like
weed
watering
eating
some
and, you know,
flowers,
just-
weed eating, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, certainly.
but he'd be the cemetery guy.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
Or woman.
Or
You
woman.
got it, you got it, person. right?
Person.
Person.
I know.
and it would allow this committee to dream a little too, if they wanted to, because Lindsay would probably find it a lot easier to support with an additional person, if you guys were like, hey, could we do geranium pots here, or, you know, I mean,
Mhm.
there would be a lot more capable of that.
I like it.
So none of that would come from our budget.
Correct, that is budgeted separately in Parks, yeah.
Okay, because we do have a sort of an excess this year. Does that get carried over?
Oh, encumbered.
It doesn't, it only gets carried over if we don't have a contract in place, or if we have a contract in place. So like, for example, Peter, we had approved his contract and scope of work. If he is unable to complete it, any funds we have allocated for him, we can roll to next year.
Okay.
But that's because we have a contract. Anything that's not contracted will go into kind of a, what we call fund balance or our savings account. And then each year we can tap from the savings to balance the budget, to make it even. So you use a portion of savings and revenues to make a balanced budget.
So Kate, is that gonna require a resolution?
So it really, at this point, the change would be done through the budget process.
Okay,
So as we develop the budget, we would request this to be the line item for mowing, the personnel, not contract.
okay,
And so that's what we're requesting, then the board would adopt the budget by resolution. Then later on in the spring, if it's adopted, Lindsay would do a resolution when she's ready to hire the actual person for their hourly rate.
just the only suggestion I have is when we get to that stage, that we all support that resolution in the town board. As historian, I would be very happy to address the town board and speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. She usually does a big one in the spring, usually April, hiring a whole bunch of seasonal staff. So this would just be, and again, this wouldn't be necessarily more work for them because they're already going through the process of hiring the seasonal staff members. So we're not doing something that we wouldn't otherwise be doing. We're not adding more
Well,
work to that.
and again, to support that, Andy and Sam are having to run out to fix stuff.
Yep.
And Andy and Sam are gonna support us with the work we do at Hun or one of the other cemeteries. If they have that person, Andy and Sam aren't overtaxed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Tasked.
Exactly. All right, I'll put something together and send it out for everyone to comment on, and then we'll shoot that over to the board.
looks good.
All right, thank you.
That sounds very doable.
I think so.
Worst case scenario,
Reasonable.
you got them all 7,
Yeah,
all 7 in 1 week.
right,
And later in the year,
right, which we all know
Yeah,
that's
a lot
likely to
less.
happen in that May, given normal weather. That person's gonna be busy in May.
mhm,
Trying to keep up. Like, I mean, I think all of us that like mowing can also speak to the fact that, you know, if you're being paid and that's your full-time job, it's not such a bad thing to be out on a May day.
Right.
Some people stomp out there.
That could get a little tedious.
then we'd have enough you'd have enough to stay busy when he's not mowing.
You probably have those busy periods and then taper off and get tasked by Lindsay doing other things. Or maybe doing
Or
landscape
just not
jobs.
punching the clock. I
Right,
mean,
right.
You're not guaranteeing 40 hours a week, right? But most likely, except for like this season, other than now, you'd be trimming the hedges, right?
Yeah. I just love the idea that he's accountable.
Yeah.
He can say, hey, I need to do this, or I did that,
Or
I can
saw
take some
this.
time off.
Or-
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
There's plenty for them to do if they're not mowing the
Right,
cemeteries. I'll
right.
tell you.
Yeah, yeah. I think
I
there's
know that's
definitely no
one of the
shortage
problems this year
projects.
with help.
And it will grow because we will be adding, without a doubt, at some time in the next 24 months, this town will probably acquire some other parkland because it is a thing that we all know
Mhm.
we want our town government to do and that they are actively pursuing. is to preserve. So it's not like where we're at is where we're always gonna be at. There's always gonna be an expansion.
Definitely parts.
I like that.
Great. Lee, you're next on the
Oh, yeah.
agenda. Would you like to give us an
Oh,
update?
to talk
on
about the Ebenezer.
Yes.
So I'm doing research for an article about the Sullivan campaign. And I wanted to pick one of our Revolutionary War veterans who I, at the time that I started thinking about this article, had been one of the veterans of the Sullivan campaign. So many of our early settlers in the region from Rome to Avon, when that's kind of, they all arrived around 1789 in that region. And our region actually extends back towards Onondaga County in the colonial era, because Ontario County was so vast. Okay, Ontario County was all of Western New York, reaching from Seneca County on the east all the way to Lake Erie. Okay, so our really
It was
history.
Ontario
is-
And north to south.
So-
Really?
The whole thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the people that were involved in settling those other towns far off to the east of us are actually were involved here. So a lot of them were veterans. A number of them were veterans who were here with the Sullivan Clinton campaign. There were 4 brigades, multiple regiments within those brigades, a lot of guys. And I wanted to pick one of those guys to kind of focus on. So Ray, I need you to jump in. If you can hear me, I need you to jump in if you know something that I say is wrong. So I went down the list that Ray has compiled years ago of the veterans in our cemeteries. And I found one guy that I don't know why, I just kind of wanted to go look for his grave. And it was at Remington Road, Matt Road. And I had just done the flags, a couple months earlier. Thought it shouldn't be a problem. I went and there is no headstone for Ebenezer Williams. And there is no stone, and so you noted that there are some veterans VA type stones at Remington Road for our Rev War, Mexican War, and War of 1812 guys. Those stones were probably put there in the 1890s. That was the our great
I
grandparents.
think it was a government.
Let's start marking these graves for our veterans. So I don't know what happened to Ebenezer Williams. Maybe he had a great stone of his own and they said, he doesn't need one. But both he and Esther,
He's missed it.
yeah, and his wife, Esther Williams,
Really? I loved her.
yes. There are no stones. So I have started the process of ordering a stone for Ebenezer from the VA. My researches into Ebenezer get really crazy because there were, I'll check my notes, 3 guys on the Sullivan campaign. Excuse me, 3 gentlemen associated with regiments that were on the campaign who were named Ebenezer Williams. And it gets worse. There were actually like 5 guys in the Continental Army named Ebenezer Williams.
But otherwise, that's good.
This is the problem. No, we don't know the names of,
Oh, wives, yeah.
and I can't pin down like the guy in the 1st New Hampshire, who a friend of mine thought that's who it was. But we couldn't say, yeah, he was married to Esther. I don't know, maybe he was married to Sarah. We just can't like associate. So Ebenezer Williams is sort of like Spartacus. If you guys all remember the movie Spartacus with the Kirk Douglas, everybody stood up and said, "I'm Spartacus." I've got all these guys standing up and going, "I'm Ebenezer Williams." So
Or laying down.
yeah, so his stone will say that he was a member of the Continental Line. And I hope that's accurate. 3 of these guys were members of the Continental Line. The Continental Line is the predecessor of our modern army. Okay, they were the US Army, Congress's own, if you will. All the other regiments were militia and they belonged to the states. So now the states did pledge each state had pledged a certain number of regiments to the Continental. The 3rd New York had an Ebenezer Williams, the 5th New York had an Ebenezer Williams, I have the records.
Same guy?
What's that?
Same guy?
This was, you know what?
He was
Funny,
collecting
Dave,
some
I
paychecks
honestly thought it was like, he could have run out of an enlistment and enlisted in the other regiment.
Yeah.
Just the way to tell. There was an Ebenezer Williams from Connecticut who was a colonel. There was the guy from New Hampshire, and then there was a guy who was in Voss's regiment, the 1st Massachusetts, who was Ebenezer Williams. Now, I will let you know, and you will hopefully see it in the article. You know, hopefully I will have something that will be a little more focused. But I kind of like the idea that apparently Ebenezer Williams was a common name, you know, it's kind of like being John Smith. So-
So,
I thought that's actually kind of cool for our region.
can you believe he's buried in the Remington Road?
Yep. That is somewhere in there. He's one of those depressions that, you know, doesn't have a headstone.
Did it fall down and get covered? We can't get-
Hopefully we'll find out someday, you know? In the meantime, if we get that stone, before we make that determination, which I would think we will, you all can decide where you want to situate it
Yeah,
within
right.
that road.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to bring, do a little event or something out there.
Yeah.
So I actually got to check, I'm gonna check with the VA today to
Okay.
see if, make sure they got that fax.
Yeah. I'm sure it's not-
I sent a little bit of, you know, supporting data. I didn't tell them there were 5 Ebenezer's.
They might know already.
The other thing that isn't directly to do with all of you, but I would put it out there, so if you have thoughts or ideas. The 4th New York Heavy Artillery was a Civil War regiment from New York State, obviously, and Company G was drawn largely from Ontario County, 1,000 men in this regiment, which was very large, kind of like a double regiment, if you will. And our town had a couple of really horrific days in 1865, and a handful of boys from Academy were killed side by side within moments, probably within an hour of each other. It's really a very sad story. I wrote about it last year, and the Academy Hamlet, I mean, it had to have been just the saddest place for months. Their headstone, well, the monument that commemorates their service is in the corner of the Academy Cemetery. They were called the 4th New York Heavy Artillery because initially they were part of the forces guarding Washington, D.C. They were a big, heavy siege artillery kind of operation. But at the end of the war, Grant was going through troops so fast, driving Lee south, that he needed men faster than they could bring in new recruits and train them. So he asked for some of the troops guarding Washington to be released since they were no longer needed. So they took these artillerymen, gave them muskets and rifled muskets, and they sent them down to join Grant's army. And these guys kind of got mocked along the way by the experienced veteran infantry. They called them bandbox soldiers because they had really nice uniforms. Oh, look at you guys, aren't you the fancy boys? That kind of stuff. Fresh fish, you'll get, you know, you're gonna learn. Bobby Lee's gonna, you know, eat you up.
Bullying.
Yeah, so they had to listen to this on their first forced march out of Washington and into Virginia. And like, this has happened a number of times historically, so it probably really kind of, you know, stuck in their craw, if you will. And they fought like devils at Spotsylvania, which was particularly desperate and bad engagement. And they were in a pretty heavy fight. And like I said, there were 3 of them that died right together. There is no monument at Spotsylvania. There is a monument to a Massachusetts heavy artillery regiment that was alongside them. There's a long story about that too, but it's a little slice of the park the military park that is within a subdivision.
Hmm.
And it was kind of a shady deal how the subdivision was sold off back in the eighties for development. It had been a local farm. And so there's just this little section, like maybe 150, 200 yards long and maybe 25 yards wide. It's like almost like a fairway on a golf course. And it's got some nice trees and it's got some nice monuments, but there's absolutely nothing commemorating any of the New York troops that were there, and most especially our boys who, like I said, really made the ultimate sacrifice. I am going to work this year to see if I can find enough people in town who would be willing to contribute to having a nice granite monument made. And then work with the Parks Department to see if we could have a monument erected at Spotsylvania Courthouse commemorating the 4th New York Heavy Artillery Company G, mentioning Company G, but you know, to finally remember what happened. And these I say this because these were, and David and Judy can really relate, any of you that had a family in the military, these were 18-year-old boys. One was 18, one was 19. Gould Benedict I think he was 27.
Friends, brothers,
But
cousins.
I just, when I started doing the research, it was really hard because my son is in the Army and he is that age. And I could only think what it was like, you know, back in the academy. So if you have thoughts on that, or if you know people who are Civil War buffs.
Just the, on that question that came up, have you ever been in the courthouse and seen all the different flags?
Yeah.
Gone through all those names? I don't know if those.
The Ontario County, we're not really special.
Oh.
No, that's the sad truth. When you start doing Civil War research.
Yeah.
Naples is the town that lost the most per capita. But when you really study it in depth, it's a pretty complicated subject, like where they came from, what regiments they joined, what battles they fought in, you know, the whole story. It is very complex. Not on, just very much like we see things happening today. Jim Johnson, who was briefly on the committee, you replaced. So Jim's family is historically from Academy. They've lived in Canandaigua forever, but they're historically from Academy. His great uncle is one of the guys on that monument. Jim owns Johnson Kennedy Funeral. So Jim's great uncle died at Andersonville. He was captured in a battle later in the summer after the other boys from Academy were killed. He was captured, sent to Andersonville and died. So it was kind of this tragedy that just kept unfolding. And it was everywhere, you know, every little town felt it. But Academy just really struck me because we all know it's just little tiny crossroads with it had a post office and a store. And then there was the other crossroads over at Seneca Point and Old Westlake Road, where the houses were. And there was a church and a school there, right near the cemetery.
Across the road.
Al Marcon lives in the old schoolhouse. So the Housels lived, you know, that beautiful yellow Victorian home that's on the corner there? That was the Housel place. I think, I'm not gonna guess, it was either the original Housel or his son that built that place. They all lived right there. And it was the Housel boy, well, one of the Housel boys, the youngest one, was killed at Spotsylvania, along with his cousin and his older neighbor, Gould Benedict.
Really?
And then his brother died in another regiment, but died that fall. So like just devastated the Housel family, devastated the Academy. And ever since last year, I've been really on a kind of a quest to see, because there is no marker to the 4th New York Heavy Artillery anywhere in the country. And everybody's.
We don't have one? We don't
What's that?
have one? We don't have one? Oh.
No,
I
they'll be
would think we-
they'll be at the courthouse, you know, they'll probably are listed amongst the dead and
Right.
the regiments, but, you know how, we all know how Gettysburg is, monuments. We go to all of the national battlefield parks, right? There's regimental monuments all over the place commemorating, you know, who fought where. But
What's
there is
it,
nothing for these guys.
what's at Academy Cemetery? You said there was just.
So
one.
Canada will put up like a granite monument to all the boys from Academy,
Oh.
all the regiments. So there's like 8 young men that left Academy and fought and who are remembered on that stuff. So there were guys from 148th New York, maybe a guy from 126th New York, and then this handful from the 4th New York Heavy Artillery.
The bird,
I read
Horn,
Walter Gable's
Housel.
book on Seneca County in the Civil War this summer. And you know, he pointed out the monuments and things that are located in
Right, you
Seneca.
can go to the battlefield and see,
In Seneca County and stuff. And he pointed out the ones that are in Gettysburg.
Yeah.
So,
the 126th New York was another group from our town. But they drew heavily from our town, wasn't just our town. And they also, just like the 4th New York Heavy Artillery, had this terrible thing where they were in a battle in 1862 where everybody else surrendered and they fought. But this entire army was surrendered. And then they were sent to Chicago to kind of cool their heels, and they were on parole. And they were called cowards. And the story got written down wrong in the newspapers, and then people started talking, and it was just like today, rumor mill, all that. And these guys were called Cowardly 126. And they were actually sustained more casualties and fought longer than any of the other regiments. They got to Gettysburg, finally got back in the, back into the war effort, and they were at Gettysburg, and they fought like demons. And racked up a lot of casualties, captured a whole lot of rebel colors in battle. Really amazing. But the sad truth is that didn't clear their name. Down through history, they were called the cowards, even though they had never been cowards and had fought like crazy men. So the 4th New York is kind of, again, another one of those stories that needs to be right. But I know all you guys have an interest in history. You may know other people. Like, if you know people who are Civil War buffs who'd be willing to contribute effort and more money to, I want to put together a fund to buy that line. Sorry, that was a lot of time.
That's okay.
That was
good.
Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing. So our next scheduled meeting would be the first Monday, that is Labor Day, Monday, September 5th. But we just scheduled our cleanup day for the 10th, so
Should we do it together?
should we do it
Yeah.
in conjunction?
Had
We
a
might as
meeting
well
the
have
same day.
a
did a great
cleanup
job
and a
last
meeting.
time.
Yeah, yeah, we
We're
like,
And have a meeting at lunchtime,
right?
right?
We like being
Yeah.
outside of the
Yeah.
office,
For
so
one.
get
Sure.
some, yeah, sound good?
So just do it right on site, Kate?
What have you got there?
Yeah. Right inside.
Me,
Ray,
my dad, my grandfather, my great,
circa 19.
1952 or 3.
Did you ever finish that book, Ray?
I'm still working
Still
on it.
working on it? Kate, what are you doing? Reading a little history?
Yeah, tell
Bring
me
it back
about
to
that.
leave. I gotta bring this one back to
Was that
leave.
about?
I
have a
haven't
whole
gotten into
I
this
have a whole
one.
stack.
You were a cute little bugger.
Yeah,
I had a whole
That's
box of
right,
books, I wonder-
so-
Lee has quite a few of the Arch Narrow books. If anyone's interested, you're welcome to borrow them. They're all local to the Finger Lakes.
Where was this taken?
at my home on South Avenue.
Did you ever see those?
East
Current.
I got a whole box of them.
I was gonna say, everybody's
Never
parents
read
have.
them.
Yeah, I have a whole stack of them too that were handed
Which
down
ones
from
you?
my grandfather.
The one
He used to
blue
work for
guy.
the Times Union. That's how it started.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he did a column for the Times Union.
Yeah, my grandfather had a whole stack of them. I got them.
Yeah.
I missed the